Morning all. I'd like to show you the first historical encounter this morning between Bobby Fischer and Mikhail Tal. This encounter was at the Portoroz Interzonal. So where is Portoroz? Portoroz, by the way, is the Italian for Portoroz, literally meaning Port of Roses. It's an urban coastal settlement in the municipality of Piran in the southwestern Slovenia. It is one of the country's largest tourist areas. The settlement and its surrounding areas are served by Portoroz International Airport, which is located in the nearby village of Sekovla. So anyway, let's have a look at this game in the Portoroz Interzonal. So Fischer, by the way, qualified for the first candidates tournament in 1959. From this interzonal, he did very, very well. And this is his game against Mikhail Tal in round 12. So he played e4, and Mikhail Tal played e5, and we saw a classical Roy Lopez. So standard stuff so far: a6, bishop a4, knight f6. White ignores knight takes e4 here. That's a move though. Knight takes e4, but bishop e7 is played by Tal. Rook e1, b5, bishop b3. So very classical Roy Lopez, very heavily beaten territory. After castles, for those interested here, c3 is actually the most popular option with 4,095 games. a3 is the second most popular with 1,835 games. a4 is also popular with 1,662 games. But h3 was chosen, and we saw Mikhail Tal play d6. So by supporting e5, sometimes knight a5 might be an idea, and it becomes possible. So there's an urgency perhaps to be able to preserve this light square bishop now. So c3 against knight a5, the bishop can slip now back to c2. We see now knight d7. And this was a system named the Ker's variation. That's what makes this variation distinct. Knight d7, you might think, what's the motivation of knight d7? Where is the knight heading? Well, the thing is, the knight can go to b6. It also means that later, if this bishop's chased off with a bishop e6, f6 becomes available to support e5 as well. And if f6 supports e5, then maybe d5 later. So challenge this bishop, support e5, prepare for d5 later. Not only that, the knight can sometimes be usefully coming to either a4 or c4. Imagine a bishop on c1, it's be attacking b2 and c3 from a4. So quite complex strategically what this knight is doing. But it's also releasing the f pawn for support of the e pawn, which might mean the d pawn is liberated later. So okay, knight d7. And we see now d4 from Fischer. Knight b6, and now Fischer commits to what looks to be quite a rare bird move actually, keeping potentially the pawn structure symmetrical. The most popular move here is knight bd2, which seems to promise a small advantage according to Livebook. So 117 games with knight bd2. Let's just show the gist of that as an example. Like it could come like this, and we can get a variation like this, and we're black playing for c5 later. So that's a different game with that knight d2. There's more tension in the position. So Fischer's move seeks like a clearer or maybe more boring pawn structure here. D takes e5. Now Tal in this position takes with the knight. If he takes with the pawn, is there an issue with taking with the pawn? Actually, let's just check this. Something I haven't really checked. Maybe bishop d5 or just knight bd2. I'm not sure this is such a big deal after bishop b7. Even if white tries to win a pawn, let's have a quick look. Well, knight takes d5 here, and it's going to be better for black actually. So there's no big deal about bishop d5 here. So anyway, Tal's choice is knight takes e5, and we get that symmetrical pawn structure still. So free pawn structure, all symmetrical here. But Fischer's idea is revealed now. Queen h5, which puts a bit of pressure on e5, keeps the rook tied down to f7 in this position as well, and maybe tries to provoke g6 as a weakness. You might think, well, is g6 useful to sack the pawn? Not sure this is a useful pawn sack. This is just better for white. So black really should do something about the pawn here. How to protect it? With the f pawn pinned, you might think bishop f6. Bishop f6 might actually be plausible, except it does release the protection on c5. White can play bishop e3 here, looking at c5, and this could get quite nasty quite quickly. And let's say g6, queen f3. There's uncomfortable pressure on f7, and with this bishop c5, it is quite an uncomfortable position potentially. And also bishop takes b6 just to secure d5 control might be nice. So okay, how to protect e5? Well, Mikhail Tal chooses queen d6 here. Okay, and now we see knight d2. Okay, you might think, well, what about chasing the queen with rook d1? Where would the queen go? Possibly queen f6 or queen g6 is playable here. Queen g6 looks at bishop h3, so if queen takes e5, bishop takes h3, so that might be a plausible. This is very nice for black actually. This position, white's forced into contortion if it doesn't want to damage his pawn structure with queen h2. It's not very nice at all. So basically, rook d1 seems fairly pointless here, given queen g6 is quite good. So knight d2 is played, heading for f3 to put more pressure on e5. Now bishop e6, so black's getting on with his plan, getting rid of the pressure on f7, and this knight is looking, later for c4 and a4 opportunities. Now we see a dynamic decision from Fischer, knight f3. It's dynamic because he's allowing, of course, doubled pawns. Why would white want doubled pawns in this position? Well, Tal does actually take, giving white the double pawns. Well, white's got the pressure, of course, on a6 and b4 to try and fix a6, but that in itself is a target potentially later to c5s. And you might think, well, wasn't there anything else? Although this is interesting, let's just quickly check. If bishop takes e6 have been played, black's doing fine here. You see this idea of knight a4 now is more painful to tie down white on the queen side, put a lot of pressure on the queen side. This is very harmless, it seems, for black, and it really justifies the whole knight maneuver. So I think that's why Fischer has to play dynamically. Sometimes you just have to accept double pawns here, getting the dynamic compensation, the pressure on a6. Of course, b3 is a target for queen e6 at some point. After knight d7, Fischer plays b4 in advance of queen e6, but also to fix the a6 pawn. Rook fd8, and then bishop g5, trying to probe black, giving black some limited options here. Mikhail Tal plays f6, not minding a few extra light square weaknesses in this particular position. The bishop drops back. Queen e6 now, so it's about equal here. Rook ed1, c5, trying to break this bind on a5 here, and these two pieces do support c5. So is white going to be left with a terribly weak pawn on b4? Doesn't he want to capture on c5 here? Well, if he captures on c5, and black's absolutely fine after knight takes c5, you can see that also knight takes e4. Now black's liberated his game a bit more. That knight's very nice on c5 here. So actually, Fischer plays a very dynamic treatment of this again. You can see the dynamism involved of his queenside pawns. He really wants to try and develop concrete threats now on the king side, and he plays the very dynamic knight h4. So the question, the obvious question to ask is, isn't this like losing the pawn over here? Let's have a quick look. Takes, well, knight f5 here starts to be a bit dangerous. Just to demonstrate how dangerous, what is the actual concrete threat? It's actually queen g4 now, threatening mate, and knight h6, winning the queen. So this is winning the queen with knight h6 check. There's no king f7. So that kind of threat is on the cards here. So black has to be careful about munching on b4. Tal actually, in advance of mating threats on g7, plays bishop f8, just trying to keep the pressure going on b4. Fischer again ignores that b4 pressure by playing knight f5. Okay, so because of this threat of queen g4, this pawn is immune anyway. We see g6, and now queen g4 directly threatening knight h6 check to win the queen. And there's not too many good moves here for black. Tal plays one of the best moves available in the position. Tal, by the way, in 1958 is close to his peak. He won the World Championship match against Botvinnik in 1960, and he was, you know, this was his a fantastic triumph over all this tournament, this interzonal. He hadn't played in an international tournament before, and you know, he ended up coming first in this tournament. And you can see, you know, there's evidence in this game of really precise moves, and this is one of them, king f7. You see, if he tries to resolve this knight h6 with, say, let's give queen e8, this could be quite disastrous. Knight d6, for example, and what does black actually do here? If the queen moved, again, b takes c5, that's horrendous. And if the bishop takes, we get a very nice advantage for white after rook takes, because look at a6, it justifies white's fixing strategy of the a6 pawn. So say c takes, and a6 is dropping here. This is very nasty. White's got all control of the position. That knight is being dominated here, and a6 is dropping off like this, for example. White's much better. So this next move is very precise by Mikhail Tal. In fact, I wonder if you can spot it. So the threat you're faced with is knight h6. What would you play here if I gave you 10 seconds to play black? I'll flip the board. 10 seconds. What would you consider playing here? You don't want to play queen e8. You'll just be allowing positional concessions after knight d6. So 10 seconds starting from now. Black to play. Okay, Tal actually played king f7, not only defending the queen is defending d6. So black's position is a bit precarious, but Tal with king f7 is holding everything together and still keeping this pressure on b4. Fischer, though, takes the option out to win the bishop here with knight h6 check. So after bishop takes, he takes the queen, and he takes the bishop, and the bishop can't quite be trapped. It could always be liberated. If black tries to trap this bishop now, say with g5, white can maybe even try h4 immediately, just giving up a pawn here. This position, rook d3, and this is very nice. You know, black's structure has been destroyed here. White's threatening potentially to double with rook d6 in mind as well. So this is quite a difficult position for black. For example, knight b6. We can just take here and take on a6. You know, the rook's still blasting down on a6. So the idea of trapping the bishop is not really on the cards with g5 here. Mikhail Tal plays c takes b4. His plan is basically now to try and win this pawn on b4. That's the weakness in white's position, but it's also kind of strength fixing down a6. Very limited moves with this pressure on a6 here, and this is one of the best. Rook dc8 just to come to c4, which would double attack both of these pawns, try and win b4, and then b2s after that, and then we would have two connected passed pawns. Okay, of course white has moves in the meantime. Black, whilst going for the two connected pass pawns on the queen side, white can try and mate black's king here. So how? Well, his first move is to get the bishop out of any potential trouble and keep dominating the knight out of these squares anyway, inviting positively though rook c4. So what's the intention for white? White's intention is to be as aggressive as possible now with his rooks against the king, and to join in with the bishop if needed later. He plays in this respect rook d2. So again, Fischer's play in this game is offering his queen side all the time for dynamic play against the king. The game has this continuous recurring pattern, and it's going to be reaching a climax now as his queen side drops. So rook takes b4, creating now an outside potential pass pawn 2-1 majority. Rook ad1, but the rooks are now working very well. d6 cannot be stopped. Rook d6 cannot be stopped. Knight f8, check. King f7. So the rooks now infiltrate more with rook b6, offering Tal, of course, two connected pass pawns here. So it's reaching a climax here. Two connected pass pawns, but white's rooks get even more aggressive now. So very tempting options is either to probe f6 or to play rook b7 check. Rook d6 is chosen. a5, signalling the intention of trying queen, giving white a time limit to try and secure at least a perpetual or more. Check. King g8. And now, maybe a tiny inaccuracy from an engine point of view. I'm not entirely sure this position is winning for anyone. The engine suggests that maybe white potentially has a small advantage here at a certain depth with the move bishop h6. Now, just to demonstrate some dangers of bishop h6 if it had been played, I know it's putting the bishop back there. It's done its job of dominating the knight. The knight's back on the first row, and so the bishop's trying to help the rooks now mate the black king. Let's just give an example. Say not rook e8 is played. Rook e8 must be, I think, one of the more accurate moves. Say black just carries on trying to queen a pawn. Here's an example. Rook takes f6, a3. We can reach a tactical climax here after check, and now rook g f7, threatening to mate with rook takes f8, so that'll be mating the black king. Knight d7 to gain a bit more time to queen the pawn. Rook takes d7, a2, rook f7, f7, allowing black to queen. This is a fantastic variation which didn't occur. Queening, king h2, but black is getting mated here. He's actually defenseless to a mate in 7. Just to show you the mate in 7 as an example. Okay, let's give an example of how black could be mated in even less. So the two rooks and the bishop reach full coordination here for a mating attack. So bishop h6 is a dangerous move in this position. It wasn't played, but black has got some good moves here. And for example, rook e8 supports the idea of knight e6, which is very useful. For example, check, knight e6 here, and black should be holding the balance just about, and it's starting to get a bit dangerous. This is actually starting to get a bit uncomfortable. One is white threatening. Well, rook takes e6 now as a threat to go mating like this to deflect the rook against the back row. So king g8 is against rook takes e6 to give the king f7. If rook takes e6, rook takes check. We've got king f7. But here rook takes a5, and this position with one of the pawns knocked out is starting to be a nice position actually for white. So the rooks are still coordinated quite nicely, and maybe there's a big advantage emerging here. So okay, it looks as though bishop h6 was a dangerous try in this position. So anyway, back to the game. Fischer actually played rook takes f6, so the bishop here is not helping the rooks for the moment. And in this position, we see rook e8 here. And you might think this is a similar position to before, surely. Rook f7. And now there's a potential threat of bishop c5 on the cards to just eliminate the knight. First, rook g7 and bishop c5 is very, very dangerous still. But we see knight e6 defending against rook g7. And here it looks as though it's dead equal now. This isn't as exciting as the bishop h6 variation. It just, from an engine point of view, this looks drawn. And in the game, after rook takes h7, a4, it's not clear that white has anything after rook a7. In fact, rook a8 was played, and Fischer now played rook hg7. Okay, now you might think, aren't these two pawns, these two connected passed pawns, really dangerous here? Why can't black just take this? Isn't Mikhail Tal going to be better if he just took this? Let's have a look. Check. King f7. Check. And where can the king go? He doesn't want to keep being checked. Does he want to sacrifice the knight? Let's try sacrificing the knight. Or does it even need to be taken? Maybe it's too dangerous to take this knight. Bishop g5 apparently is the way to play this. If the knight is taken here, then a3 starts to be really dangerous for a2. These passed pawns are really, really dangerous for the bishop. But even in this position, the bishop can try and help. Even this is about equal. So okay, after rook hg7, Tal didn't play knight takes g7. He played actually king h8, and actually we got a perpetual here. So I think towards the end, I think the climax of white's play may be more effectively reached. Instead of grabbing the pawn here, I believe bishop h6 is a very interesting try in this game. So this was the first dramatic draw anyway. First dramatic game ever, first classical game between Bobby Fischer and Mikhail Tal, ending in a draw like this. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.